Find your God and find your true self. For many of us, the search for the truth begins with self and ends with God. Certainly this is true for the author and my guest joining me this next hour, Michelle Prosser. In this remarkable book, Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting, Michelle opens up her life experience to light the way for each of us as we undertake our own journey of self-discovery. Many books teach us how to use the law of attraction to bring into reality the life we really want. Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting puts God front and center in the process and in our lives. We not only benefit from Michelle's many experiences, but also from the numerous exercises she includes, exercises that allow us to get to know God in a different way than we've ever experienced before. Michelle shows us how to take and make God a part of each day, each experience, each trial, and each celebration. Michelle also urges us to journey through this book with joy and playfulness, concepts that are often lost in the cares of our world. Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting is ready to take you to a new place where joy is not forgotten and playfulness is a new way of life. We are taking calls this hour, and if you would like to call us with a question that has to do with a situation in your life that you're struggling with, Michelle is also the founder and president of Energy Focus Life Coaching. We would be happy to talk with you. Again, we are taking calls. If you would like to speak with myself and Michelle, the number to call is 602-412-4949. Without further ado, welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So why don't you start by telling us how you got started in all of this? How did this all begin, this path with working with the law of attraction and with a spiritual element of it?
Well, for a lot of people, it's the same thing. It takes a tragedy to really realize that, the way I'm working my life right now isn't working. And so for me, I'd always been a very high-achieving career woman. And when it was time to have a baby, I just thought my body could do it. And I didn't understand that I just couldn't force it to happen. So I finally, after fertility treatments and a lot of intervention, got pregnant. And 5 months in, my baby was diagnosed with a heart defect. And she died at birth. And so I stumbled around for about a year, just shell-shocked. And finally, it dawned on me that I just couldn't do it by myself, that I needed to have divine help. And I had not read the books, Conversations with God, or these other books about the law of attraction. I just kind of stumbled it on myself, and I started praying and thanking God in advance that I would adopt a baby girl and get pregnant with a baby boy. And within 2 months of each other, I got pregnant with my baby boy and went to Russia and adopted a baby girl. So all of a sudden I was like, whoa.
Were you a very spiritual person before that experience?
Yes and no. I was a very mystical child, always had a very, very strong reaction. In my 20s, being very geared in politics, working all the time, I really lost a lot of that connection. I lost my roots. And I had started to find my way back because I was trying to find ways to handle the stress of my jobs. So I started doing yoga. I started doing some meditation. But I consider that whole experience a gift, as painful as it was, because it really forced me to realize I couldn't control everything, that I had to surrender, and that there was a greater power that could certainly help me out.
Mm-hmm. And after that happened, the grieving process, I'm sure, was very strenuous for you. What was the first inkling to you that you were to take on that mindset, so to speak? When did you know that you were coming out of that experience with that kind of thought process?
Well, the first thing I did to kind of come out of it was I did a goals poster, like a vision board that you see people do. And I had a little picture of a little blonde girl and little boy booties. And then I had wanted to travel, so I had all these travel pictures, and one of them was St. Basil's Cathedral in Red Square in Russia, which I have no idea why I picked that. And so there I was a year later, standing in front of St. Basil's Cathedral, pregnant, with the snow coming down, getting ready to adopt my baby girl.
Wow!
And that was pretty mind blowing. I remember saying, okay, I get it. I'm living in grace.
Huh. Were you familiar with the law of attraction through all of this, or did that come later?
That came, I read Conversations with God about 3 years later and went, oh my God, I did that.
So you did you did the vision board before you were familiar with the law of attraction?
Well, I'd read Simple Abundance, and the author of that tells you to do a vision board, and she probably sketched out a very simple explanation, but there was never the word law of attraction that I remember. There was never a principle that I had read. Mm-hmm. So I was probably picking it up different places, but it wasn't like Conversations with God or The Secret where you're like, oh, okay, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm. Because you write a lot about the law of attraction in your book. And so I'm curious how the process began for you to write and to come out with your writing, and was that part of the healing process for you?
Well, it's very interesting because I went on then to have a third child where I went to bed every night and trusted, thanked God in advance that I was going to have a little girl who looked like me, named Sophia Lilia Grace, and a year later I woke up pregnant. So, my life was going pretty well, except I was in a very bad marriage. And near the end of that marriage, I was training to be a coach, and I was in a group where we started studying Lynn Grabhorn's book, Excuse Me, Your Life is Waiting. And we were doing all sorts of these principles, and I came home one day and my husband had lost his job. And just a couple months later, I had decided to leave him because he'd said something very hurtful to me while I was in the hospital. And so it was kind of a very dramatic way to start writing and really getting in depth in the law of attraction because, within 6 months I had no child support. My car was repoed right out of my driveway. I didn't know how I was going to feed my kids, and everything turned around though.
Yeah, and I think that's a very inspiring story that you share pieces of throughout your book. And, I know when a lot of my listeners call in or when I'm talking to people just in crossing, there's so much out there right now. And I talk about this all the time on the show as far as, the economy and things are really bad and people just can get caught up in this downward spiral of, attracting the things and the experiences to their life that validate that. So you are obviously a living, breathing example of how your life can be in that spiral and then you pull yourself out of it. How do you coach people through those kinds of experiences? I'm sure you use your experience that you've been through as well, correct?
Yes, and one of the things I want to say is during that summer where I had this very tragic thing happen while I was in the hospital where my ex-husband had said he wanted me to die on the operating table, and then I decided to leave him, and every single day that summer something else happened, something tragic. And I remember sitting in my mother's house desperately thinking, all this stuff I'm reading says if I have bad feelings, I'm going to create more bad things, but I don't know how to get out of this because it's really bad right now. And no matter how hard I frantically try to be cheerful and upbeat and vision, all I want to do is cry, and it's really bad. And another coach said something very wise to me. She said, maybe you're not meant to manifest right this minute. Maybe you're meant to grieve and heal, and don't be so desperate about trying to turn your energy around and hide your feelings. And that was very, very helpful. So I say to people, life is a process, and if you're down, work through that process, but don't get dragged down by it and don't get stuck in it. And I'll share something. We all go through times where we feel a little unsteady. So last summer, I was starting to get nervous about the economy, and I was sitting in church thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen? And it was just a huge aha to me that the minute I felt fear come up, the minute I felt it in my body, in my thoughts, that was the time to say, God, this is too much for me. And I need to give this to you because this is too much for me. And that has really totally turned around for me. Here I teach this, but we all get in those moments where it's like, uh-oh. That totally turned things around for me, and my business is actually doing better than ever. in this economy. And so what I try to tell people is you don't have to do this by yourself.
And so would you suggest that they find some kind of, what if they don't have a spiritual belief system in place? How do you work with them then?
Well, you know, my book is written for people who don't necessarily have one or have rejected the one they were raised in or that society tends to push on us. I say go ahead and find a direct connection with your higher power, however you might define it, however you might see God in your image. It might be that you define it as your higher self, but, you know, I'm not trying to convert people who don't believe at all, but I think that the majority of Americans, polls show, at least the majority of Americans, believe there is some kind of higher power. And so,
do you find that when people are going through very traumatic experiences that they actually, in fact, question the existence of God?
Absolutely, and that's a healthy thing. And people go one way or the other. They either draw eventually closer to God or they shut it off because you betrayed me. You weren't there for me. And so one of the things that I tell people is just realize that the questioning process is part of building a stronger relationship. That, you know, you're moving from maybe a younger version of God, maybe a child version of God to, you know, this being is strong enough to handle you saying, I'm really mad here, or why did you do this to me?
Mm-hmm. And then they seem to come around at some point where it's about surrender. Don't you think they have to kind of surrender to a flow and to the acceptance that they're not in control, like you spoke of in your story, which I have found myself in my own situations in life where, you know, it hasn't been always so easy and you just can't control. So it's about letting go of what we think needs to be, don't you think, on some level?
Yeah, and, you know, it's a hard balance because when you talk about the law of attraction, it seems to have a lot of control in it. You're creating a vision, and you're thanking God for it, and you're holding it, and maybe you're doing a vision board, and you're writing goals. And so what people, I try to coach them to understand is that then you have to let it go, and you have to say, I'm not going to demand a certain outcome. This is what I'm putting out there, and when I make it back, it might look different than what I expect, but it may be better.
True, because we may think we want it a certain way, and when it comes in, it may be even better than what we could have thought. So are we defeating ourselves in a way by hanging on to these hopes and expectations?
I think they have to be put out there loose enough, and we have to be open enough to say, okay, what comes my way, I'll see as an opportunity. You know, there are people who, when they get fired, it feels like the end of the world, but they might be in a job they hated, and it might be there is another opportunity. I have a nanny, a part-time nanny who got fired, and I kept reassuring her, this is actually going to be a good thing. You really were in an unhealthy environment, and now she's working in a place that she's very happy. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it often creates more opportunity. My partner, he arrived in my life, and I had been praying for years. When I was married, I'd been praying for a man who adored and cherished me and really honored me. And he showed up, and it was the wrong time. I was writing my book. He didn't look like what I expected him to look like. He wasn't an intellectual like I normally dated. Well, it hadn't been working for me before, so I don't know why I would stick into that pattern. And he was exactly who I needed. But, you know, there was a partner, my life partner, who I was ready to say, it doesn't fit the picture I was expecting.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of people do that. They say what they want. They say well, I take that back. They know what they don't want. They say what they don't want. They put out there what they don't want. But do you find in your business, I mean, we're going to go to break in about a minute or so, but do you find in coaching people that they know more often what they don't want than what they do?
Yes, and you know what? It's a good way to figure out what you do want, but if you get stuck in your don't wants, and Lynn Grabhorn says this, if you get stuck in your good wants and you put your attention there, that's what you get, is more of what you don't want.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So we're gonna head off to break in a minute or so. And on that note, I'm talking with Michelle Prosser, president of Energy Focus Coaching and Consulting, who works with organizations and individuals to reach goals and manifest a better life. She is committed to deepening her own spirituality, increasing self-awareness so that she can model to clients what she teaches. Michelle's emphasis is on increasing focus and energy, improving communication, and identifying self-defeating behavior. We are taking calls if you have a situation or if you would like to send me an quick message to ask a question about a particular situation in your life that you are currently struggling with. We'd be happy to talk to you. When we come back from break, we're going to be talking about what is resisting our own bliss. We'll be right back after this message.
Spend more time with your family? Are you looking for a way to incorporate your financial dreams in with your hopes for a better life for you and others? Well, it can be done, and the Family Value Network is the place to start. At Family Value Network, they believe that in order for the general family dynamic to become one of health and vibrancy, families need to be together. And they believe that home-based income opportunities offer families a chance to do that and to build a secure future, which is why the Family Value Network has created the online place for creating personal wealth with home-based income. At the Family Value Network, their greatest desire is for global shift of consciousness, to create a place for a network of families excited about reaching their highest potential. Do yourself a favor, see what it's all about. www.familyvaluenetwork.com. Take your future in your own hands and make a difference in the world while you're at it. FamilyValueNetwork.com. The life you've always dreamed of has already begun.
AchieveRadio.com, the positive side of broadcasting.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Hillary Raimo. Speaking with me this hour is author Michelle Prosser, author of Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting. I want you to think back to when you experienced bliss. Did it feel too much for you to handle? Have you had a mystical experience that felt overwhelming? What might allow you to handle this intensity better? We're going to be talking about questions such as these in the next segment. And just a reminder, too, we are still taking calls. And if you have a message you'd like to send through the InQuick system on AchieveRadio.com, please feel free to do so. So, Michelle, let's start with resisting bliss. What do you mean by the concept of people resisting bliss? It would seem to me that people would want to be happy, and so in trying to attract happiness to them, they would be open to bliss. But is that not common?
A lot of times people find it too much, and it kind of goes back to when we were little. If our energy was too big for our parents, if we were too happy and running around like crazy, and or we might have felt almost merging with the universe. Some people have that experience young. That can be scary, or perhaps we got messages from our parents that our energy was just a little too much. We were a little too happy, or sometimes even people got messages from their parents that if they had a depressed parent, that it wouldn't be right for them to be happy if their parent was unhappy. So there are all sorts of ways where we've pushed down this ability to receive bliss. And also, bliss is often direct communion with God, and if you have some resistance to that on some level, even unconscious, that can get in the way.
Mm-hmm. So is it a fear of losing oneself, or is it a fear of making somebody upset, or maybe a combination of both? Or what's the primary fear behind that? Is it just bothering somebody or making things uncomfortable, so to speak? I mean, when you say that, a child, may feel the anger perhaps from parents who tell them to stop when their energy is overloaded, or if a partner, is extraordinarily happy, but another one isn't. I mean, I can imagine a lot of scenarios with this topic. And so what do you think really is behind a person's uncomfortableness with that situation?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, is it a fear of losing oneself? Because I do think these other issues we get as we get older, taking care of other people's feelings, making sure we're not overwhelming people. But the core root is a feeling that when you're one with God, you're merging. So it's hard to tell where your personality is, where your ego is, and that's very threatening to the ego. And it's got all sorts of nice little defense mechanisms to fight against that one.
We could probably do a whole show on that topic, just alone. Now wait, let's talk about the dynamic of a couple for a second, perhaps a married couple, and they kind of met at one particular place in their journey, and then after being married for so long, they've grown and they've gone through certain experiences and they've changed. I mean, it's very common. We can all relate to that on some level. Those of us who've been in long-term relationships, and when somebody begins to do a lot of inner work and they begin to shift and they begin to grow that connectiveness to a sense of God or spirit or a higher power, higher sense of themselves, and they begin to become that happiness, is it common then for the other partner to be uncomfortable with the other person's change?
Yeah, anytime there's a change in the system, I tell my clients that part of their job when they're being coached is to retrain the people around them. So if they've been overly helpful or not good about setting boundaries, they have to retrain that. If they're moving into a place of greater consciousness and that's threatening to their partner, they have to retrain that. Sometimes when one partner has lost weight and the other hasn't, there's a lot of insecurity that comes up in the partner that hasn't. So, but a lot of this is coming from a place of heart. If we, and again, the ego can be pretty tricky. My teacher says that as we get more spiritual, as we get more conscious, we take on an inner critic that is more spiritual and more, uses all those things in a new, tricky way. So then you start thinking, well, my partner isn't as evolved as I am. Because the inner critic can go after other people too. And so you're just really careful. You have to be careful to remember to keep that heart connection. And so one of the things I try to remind clients is always try to keep that heart connection, to remember your two souls connecting.
Yeah. And what do you mean by retrain? When you say you tell a client to retrain, could you just clarify what you mean by that a bit?
Sure. So I'll give you an example. I don't ask my kids to help me around the house enough. So so I'm starting to set new expectations about what they do, when they're going to help me clean up, what they can leave around the house. So that's retraining. For somebody who has a partner who doesn't like them doing personal work, it's sitting down, being very reassuring that, I love you and I want to know why this bothers you, but ultimately this is my path and it's really important that I do it. And just setting forth expectations that, this is part of a partnership, is supporting each other's growth.
Did you experience an element of that in your marriage, or the one with your ex-husband?
Well, that was yes, I did. He was very abusive. So there was that element too. But, yeah, I think I really puzzled him. At certain times he would say, I thought I married a preppy and then I got a hippie. I still don't consider myself either of those, but anyway, yeah, they say, there's a saying that women marry men expecting to change them, and I certainly did that. And men marry women thinking they will never change.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. Lots of truth to that.
Yeah.
So with your personal experience, having gone through that, and I'm sure you experience this many times with your own clients and your work, what happens if a person can't retrain them, so as you say, and move them into a place of understanding, and they're just so threatened by the change? I always relate it to like being in a dance, and as you guys, people are used to doing their own dance with each other, and then one partner changes the dance steps because they've changed, and all of a sudden it's about relearning new dance steps for both people so that they can find that rhythm again. And has it been your experience that if that doesn't happen, the relationship usually dissolves?
It can. It can. If one partner is actively resisting the growth of another. My favorite quote about relationships is Scott Peck from The Road Less Traveled, who says that true love is supporting the spiritual growth of your partner. Mm-hmm. And for me, that is kind of my how I view relationships. And if you see one person trying to hold another person back, it's tragic. And that my client then has to decide, do I want to stay in a relationship where I can't fully be me?
Food for thought. That's an interesting, point, and I think a lot of people reach that crossroads eventually. So let's go to your book for a moment, and let's kind of talk about, where this journey started for you in deciding to write this book, and what made you want to come out with this particular topic.
Well, another law of attraction story. I had decided I wanted to write a book, and I had wanted to write a coaching book about people living fuller lives. And so, for about 6 months, I went to bed every night and said, thank you, God, that I write a best-selling book. Haven't gotten to best-selling yet, but about 6 months later, a man came up to me at an event I was facilitating, and he said, I'm the new CEO of the spiritual publishing company in town, and I don't know anybody, and would you like to go to lunch? And pretty soon I became his coach, and then I went and team built for did some team building exercises for the publishing company, and just as I was starting to get my courage up to say, I'd really like to write a book for you, he turned to me one day and said, Michelle, you've got to write a book. And I was like, okay.
Was that on your vision board, too, by any chance?
Yes.
It was, Let's talk about that for a minute for those that may be listening out there who don't quite understand what a vision board is. Let's start with some basics. Why don't you describe for the listeners who are tuning in what that means and how you do it and so on and so forth.
I'd love to. I've actually run 7 years' worth of workshops on them. I usually do them at the beginning of every year. So you start with a poster. The first time I ever did it, my page wasn't big enough, and then I had to keep taping things on. So make sure you have enough space to really play with. And you collect cards, things out of magazines. I think the more personal you can make it, the better. If you have a picture of something you like with somebody, like I have a picture of me with Oprah. I haven't gotten there yet either, but I actually cut a picture out and put it on the head of the person standing next to Oprah.
So when you are on Oprah, we can say, on the Hillary Raimo show, she said she was going to be on Oprah.
I have also, and vision boards are very powerful. So, you want to be careful about what you put, because I've had people put very negative things on theirs because they're trying to work through something, and I ask them to think about, is this your vision for the future? But I can't tell you how powerful it is. So many things in my life. For example, I was in another relationship, and it was the workshop. It was the day of the workshop, and my relationship was going very badly, and I was doing my goals poster, and I decided I was going to really focus on making love a priority. And I have these beautiful pictures of a man and woman in a medieval outfit, riding on horseback, looking at mountains. And that relationship broke up, and lo and behold, 2 years later, I'm dating a man who does Renaissance reenacting and horseback riding.
Wow.
So you think carefully, and one of the things I ask people to do is think about, why are you drawn to this picture? What does it say? I've had clients come in, and all of a sudden they have all these pictures of babies they're putting in their poster, and they didn't know they wanted to have one until they did it. And I've had other clients be really drawn to the outdoors and realize that the way they'd structured their life, they weren't getting enough time outdoors. So it can not just work toward the future about what you want on it. It can open up maybe desires that you aren't listening to inside.
Yeah, that's a good point, too, because it's been my experience that being present in the present moment is when these little doorways open to the opportunities that we're seeking. So I think a lot of people do often get caught in the future aspect of, well, this is what I want to manifest, and I'm going to do that. And so they're so focused on what's to come that they forget about being so present in the present moment. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and let me tell you, the biggest key to bringing the future to you and the kind of future you want is in the present being grateful. So the universe knows, God knows, however you want to put it, whether you're grateful or not, whether you can see the abundance around you. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to go to bed every night and say, I am grateful for these things that happened today. Every time I tuck my kids in, I go, what's something you're grateful about today? And then tell me something that you want to be, that you are going to thank God in advance for in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We have a question submitted from Zach in London. Zach writes, he mentions he has insomnia and he's up very late. It's very late in London right now, Zach, but thanks for joining us. Great to hear from you. Zach says, I'm an airline pilot in my profession. Our training is about planning ahead for every possible problem and keeping them from happening by being prepared or being ready to deal with the consequences if the problem can't be avoided. Often this seems to be a contrast to the law of attraction, since we dwell so much on bad things that could happen. Could you talk about this paradox? I'm confused. Thanks, Zach. Great question.
Oh, what a great question. So, Zach, the most important thing that you can do is trust yourself. Kind of like that airline pilot that just seemed to know intuitively that he needed to land on the Hudson. No matter how prepared he was for something going wrong, he could have never expected that. I just saw the interview with him today, and he said he was just stunned. So the first thing is learning to trust that inner voice inside you about what's going to happen. And so in learning to trust that and learning to trust the fact that if something arises, you'll get guidance on how to handle it, you can stop worrying quite so much. There's a difference between discernment and being stuck in negativity. So I think what airline pilots do is they try to discern what could go wrong and how could I prepare on it. But if they start fixating on it, if they start stewing about it, if there's a lot of emotion around it, that's when you get in trouble. So it's being back in the present moment. what's happening right now? What am I grateful for right now? It might be I'm grateful that I have all these skills so that if something does go wrong, I know how to do it. But it's more important to trust that the right thing's going to arise in the moment. Even in this economic climate right now where it looks like things are imploding, we have to trust that some of this has to happen so something new and better can arise. And I would never wanted to go through some of the crises I went through. I'm sure the guy who landed on the Hudson wouldn't have wanted to go through that. We don't have to say he attracted it because he was worried about what was going to happen in the future. I think we give ourselves too much power. And this is one of the things I disagree with some teachers on the law of attraction. We give ourselves too much power to say that everything bad that happens to us, we attract it in. Sometimes it's a lesson. Sometimes it's bringing about a higher good. Christopher Reeves fell off a horse and became a paraplegic, a quadriplegic. But look at the amazing good he created in the world before he died. And who knows, maybe his soul agreed before he got here that he was going to be a great teacher, and he wasn't sure how he was going to be that great teacher. But he would just have been a famous movie star if that hadn't happened to him.
Do you think that things happen to us in our lifetime because we've asked that to happen before we come in? I think we should get into that in the last segment of the show. We're going to head to break in about 30 seconds or so. Michelle, before we go to break, why don't you tell everybody listening the best way to find you is your website, I'm sure, but why don't you go ahead and give that to all of us quickly?
Sure, it's Energy Focus Coaching, ING, energyfocuscoaching.com.
Great, and we'll be right back after these messages. I'm talking with Michelle Prosser, author of Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting. We'll be right back after these messages.
Charlize Theron with People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Almost all the puppies for sale at your local mall were churned out by breeding facilities called puppy mills. Constant confinement drives the dogs mad. They are impregnated continually until they can no longer produce a litter. If you choose a dog from the mall, a dog you could have saved from the pound will die.
Contact PETA to learn how you can make a difference at 757-622-PETA or visit PETA.org.
Cookies, cupcakes, brownies, fresh from the oven. This February, bake delicious goods and make lifelong memories by celebrating Bake for Family Fun Month at homebaking.org. Go to homebaking.org for recipes, how-to videos, and links to the biggest names in the baking business. Start a new family tradition this February with Bake for Family Fun Month at homebaking.org. Delicious.
GRadio.com. What talk radio should be all the time.
Everybody, and welcome back. I'm talking with Michelle Prosser. I'm sorry about that, Michelle. It's prose. Excuse Me, Your God is Waiting is her new book. And we're going to be talking about something called Receiving Your Highest Energy. And before we went to break, we were also talking about life plan and bringing in certain experiences into our life that we pre-plan, perhaps as a soul, before we come in and incarnate as a human being. And that's a theory that a lot of people write about. There's been many great, wonderful books and theories put out there in the world about that. And Michelle, I'd love your thoughts on what that is, and do you believe in that? Do you believe that we actually come here planning our experiences before we're born?
Well, I'm open to it. One of the things that I believe is that I don't have all the answers, and that, the Native Americans talk about the great mystery, and trying to figure out all about the great mystery is kind of a losing battle. So for me, it intuitively feels right. It feels like there are things that happened in my life that I probably agreed to before I got here, but I don't know, and I've done some reading about it. But I had a big tragedy happen, a confluence of horrible events that happened in a 3-week period that I write about in my book. And, when it ended, I tried to figure out why. And for me, it could have been a past life thing where I kind of repatterned it. It could have been law of attraction, that I didn't think highly enough of myself, and so I created it in. It could have been that I just didn't attend to all the details in my life. And I decided that I didn't need to know why. I just needed to try to figure out what was the message. And the message that came to me was that I didn't fully honor and love myself and find myself worthy. So I think instead of looking for the why, although it's fun and it's interesting, when you're in a life crisis, the most important thing is, what can I be learning from this?
Yeah, because I think people get caught up in the whole, is this a past life thing? Is this, or is this, they want to wrap some kind of label around that. Mm-hmm. And so they spend so much time distracting themselves from the core issue, or what's trying to be healed, or what's the lesson that's trying to come through, that they get caught up. I see it happen with past lives stuff all the time. I do past life regression as well. So it's always interesting to me how everybody has all of their past life stuff figured out, but this life is very, very ungrounded. So I always wonder if they're going to go into the next life and figure out this life, and that's what it's going to take, because we seem to have this in, I don't know if it's just a human curiosity thing, where we just, we have it all figured out, what we were and who we were, and, who Mom, Dad, and Uncle Joe are, and who they were in their past life, and all this stuff. But what gets lacked is the focus on the present lifetime. But you have something really interesting in your book called clearing. Well, you talk about clearing negative energy, and you talk about something that's called the seductiveness of chaos. And I'd like to kind of switch gears for the end of the show here and talk a little bit about what you mean by the seductiveness of chaos.
Well, I am a great victim of it myself. It's that if we have a lot of it actually goes back to your theory about how everybody's got everything figured out except their own life. It's that if we have a lot of drama in our life, we don't have to look at what we need to do to move forward. And so I was very good at getting sucked into the drama and making up a lot of stories about things. I have a good friend. We both were trying to get coaching work with this big institution, and the guy would never call us back. And she noticed that the other coach didn't have any stories about it. She just kept calling. Where she and I was like, well, he shouldn't be that way. And she felt like, he doesn't like me. And guess what? The person that didn't have any stories finally got in and got the job. So it's really interesting to step back from it and think, how am I feeding the situation? How am I distracting myself? And, just to kind of go back, I've actually had past life regressions, and they've been very powerful. But I realized that for me, I keep getting hit upside the head by what I call divine 2x4s until I learn a lesson in life. You know, they get small. They start out small, and they get bigger and bigger until you pay attention. And that's what I think part of the chaos is am I paying attention to these little nudges that Spirit gives me? And then do I have to be whacked on the head about it? So, you know, for me, I got caught in the story a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think all of us can relate to that on some level. In your book, you write, have you been seduced by chaos? If you have been or still are, what is it that you get out of the experience? Do you become a drama king or queen when chaos appears? Does chaos make you feel like a victim? Make a list of 5 positive, empowered ways to respond to chaos. What would you suggest as a positive response to chaos?
Oh, I have a wonderful story. I just worked with a client on this yesterday who's a CEO, and when he starts shutting down because there's chaos around him, because that's how he responds to chaos. I said we've got to retrain the patterns in your brain, the neural pathways. So what is it you tell yourself when there's all this chaos? And he goes, I can't handle all this. And I said, so basically you tell yourself you're a victim. And he said, yes. And I said, so what's a better way? And he said, I could tell myself I can't handle it. And I said, okay. So now he's promised for the next week, every time he thinks, I can't handle this when chaos erupts, he's going to say, no, I can't handle this. This is a challenge that's going to make me smarter and stronger and able to handle things.
So would you suggest that people stop? I mean, because it's an interesting point that you bring up, that it is about rewiring the brain, so to speak, and actually literally, because our thoughts create these pathways that, you know, sends energy through our brain to certain areas of the brain on a repetitive basis. So
Dr. Pert actually says we get like a heroin hit when we go into an old pattern, even if it's unhealthy. It's like a heroin hit to the brain.
So that's is that a long process of changing that, or is it something that can happen instantly?
Well, I think with Spirit, with God, it can happen instantly. I think if we're doing it on our own, you know, we just have to keep catching it and retraining the way you would with muscle memory when you're trying to learn a dance or play an instrument. The way it's habitual for many people to not be able to type or do things that was hard for them at first. The thing is, when you have a pathway in your brain and you change the pattern, the pathway that was built is pretty deep because it's gone back and forth, and so you have to create a new pathway. And while you do that, it takes a little while. But the most important thing is it takes being present. So when I was able to get that client to say, okay, when you're in chaos, what happens? He was able to tell me. And now his challenge is, instead of the train leaving the station with him in the middle of chaos, is to be able to say, oh, I have a choice in this moment. And that's the beauty of this. I have a choice in each moment of how I'm going to respond.
You put it lovely in your book. You say, choose light, not dark.
Yeah.
So when you say choose light, not dark, are you talking about that present moment?
Yes, and not going into all the shadow, you know, even bringing the shadow into the light, but not going into the negative drama, getting sucked into other people's agendas, going into a very down victim space. But really choosing to be a positive light in the world and be present in the moment. The spiritual work I do is called Diamond Heart. And one of their quotes that I love is, presence is being in the moment exactly as it is. So it's being able to be present no matter what's happening. We tend to think, oh, I can be present when I'm, you know, walking through flowers in a field, but it's a lot harder to be present if your teenage daughter's screaming at you.
That's so true. So do you go on to talk about finding energy role models. What would be an example of energy role models?
Well, you can find people in real life, or I use a lot with my clients archetypes. So, for example, with people in business, when they're trying to figure out how to be a new kind of leader, I ask them to think about, like in this environment, how would you be a magician? How would you create and vision and be able to bring forth magic in your world? Often when people get promoted into a position where they're supervising people, I say, how would you be a sovereign, a good sovereign, not somebody that nobody would want to be around, but how could you think about the good of all? How could you bless people? How could you set strong boundaries? How could you delegate well so that people around you can grow? So archetypes are wonderful ways to play with energy.
I agree completely with that. In fact, that's one of the main things I use in my own work, too. So you then go on to talk about being the energy that you want. And I'm referring to chapter 12 in your book called Receiving Your Highest Energy, which was one of my favorite chapters in this book. And I believe that there's really a lot of help in this book for people who are struggling with aspects of their life that are really dark or filled with chaos and confusion, and they just can't seem to find ways out. So when you say being the energy that you want, are you kind of saying, if you be the change that you want to see in your life, is that sort of the same thing?
That and some of my favorite teachers of the law of attraction are Esther and Jerry Hicks with the Abraham teachings. And Esther Hicks has this thing that I heard on a CD where she said, if you want, your higher self is already what you want it to be. Your job is just to catch up with it. And so I write about that in the book, and I kind of fleshed it out more. And she might not have said it quite that way. That might be my quote. But I remember I was making a salad while I was listening to that CD, and I dropped the bowl because it was so profound to me that I think what she said is you already are what you want to be. You just have to catch up with it. And that's true. So stop wanting and just start being it. Start feeling that energy. And of course, you're not going to be perfect. I yell at my kids. I don't want to, but I do. But, we're human. And in every moment, we have a new, fresh chance to choose a different way.
So in coming to the end of our show together, what is the message that you hope your readers get from this book overall?
Well, I think this book came out at a time where people really need good news. And I hope they get a message of being an empowered being who has a choice in every moment, and that you're not alone, that you have support from your higher power, from spirit, and it's right there available for you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining me and my listeners for this past hour. For more information on Michelle and her coaching services, you can visit her website, energyfocuscoaching.com. I want to end with a quote from her book, and she says, being the energy you want. You can choose to hold your energy like people you admire hold theirs. You can be the energy you want. One way to do this is to model after others you admire. Another way is to try on the energy you want as if trying on a new outfit. Just as aspiring executives are told to dress to feel like they are executive material, you can try on the energy you want to be. You will start to become it. So in healing our lives and moving out to change what we no longer want or no longer serves us, all we have to do is pick, imagine, and feel the happiness and joy that we want to create. Until next time, everyone, live well. Join me next week, same time. Namaste.